Welcome to Snipatuit Pond and Snipatuit Brook. This is Snipatuit Pond. It's a 660-acre pond in the northern part of Rochester, Massachusetts. It has two outlets. One is the Mattapoisett River. That's in the upper right-hand portion of the pond you see here. It flows down south to Mattapoisett. And this is Snipatuit Brook. That's the outlet that flows north into the Assawompsett chain of lakes. Long ago, this was all wide open. The brook was passable. It was a passageway for the Native Americans who paddled up the Mattapoisett River to Snipatuit Pond, where there was an extensive camp. And then in the Snipatuit Brook, over to Assawompsett Pond, where there was another extensive village. Today, the brook is mostly impassable. It's thickly overgrown with briars and brown brush, bushes of all kinds, swamp maple, and white pine trees. You can see there's almost no trace of the brook left in this part of it. I know, I've been there and tried to pass through it. At this point, we're reaching the waterworks for the cranberry bog out on Snipatuit Road. You can see on your right there's an old pad road that was made by filling in through the wetlands. It went over to the land on the other side to the east. Here's the bog and the large canal, which is currently maintained today, and that's how the water harvest is done in the fall. It depends entirely upon water being available from Snipatuit Pond through Snipatuit Brook. You can see the brook is largely gone. There's just a flowage through swamp. Very slow moving, meandering water like a giant sheet moving through a sponge or a wet towel. Traces of the old brook are still visible. And in certain areas, like the large bog right there, it's still quite visible. Notice there's not a lot of space in between the upland to the east and the upland to the west. There's not much evidence of agriculture in that bog. I don't believe it was ever used for anything. But as we proceed, you'll notice that there's trenching running east and west, showing that Snipatuit Brook was used to help drain some of the wet land on either side of it. The brook is fairly well defined here through the high uplands on either side. But if you get down there and go for a walk, you'll find it's almost impassable. Thick with greenbrier and brush. There are down trees all over the brook. This is the Algonquin gas line easement. There's a bulrush swamp that's pretty much crowded out the brook at this point, but the water still flows through there. As we move toward North Ave, you're going to see quite a bit more of the lateral trenching. Now, I don't believe that is cranberry bog trenching. I think that was probably marsh hay. So this all would have been cleared once. And I think probably it would have been possible to see in both directions from North Ave, all the way up to Quiticus Pond and all the way back to Snipatuit Pond. At the outflow of Snipatuit Brook, it reaches the chain of ponds known as the Assawompsett Pond Complex, which drain into the Taunton River watershed through the Nemasket River far in the distance. Let's turn around and take another look back toward Snipatuit Pond. And this is somewhat more informative because the sun is now in front of us. And reflecting on the water, it's far easier to see the extent of the flooding in this flowage. So the water that flows through this brook valley doesn't just flow in the brook itself. It flows all through this giant wetland. It's an excellent habitat for wildlife. Deer, muskrats, fisher, mink, raccoons, foxes, and coyotes. They're all living in there, and if you go for a walk, you can find evidence of their passing. We can get a closer look at the density of the understory if we drop down a little bit right here. We're at 150 feet now, and we're going to go down to about 40 feet. Gets pretty thick looking when you're looking at it from the side. I've been in there. Trust me, it's very slow going. Here is a topographic map showing the extensive swampland surrounding Snipatuit Pond, which is where it gets all of its water. The water flows in the lower left down that outlet of the Mattapoisett River to Buzzards Bay, and out the west side of the pond on Snipatuit Brook up to the Assawompsett Lakes chain. I've dropped a pair of waypoints in so we could check the elevations at the two outlets of Snipatuit Brook. Here's one. They're both 49 feet exactly, but as you'll see, the water's flowing in one direction. All right, now let's get right in there and have a look in the swamp itself. It is thick, and it's wet. There's the margin between the swamp and the upland. Walking further in, I'm almost to the brook, but this is not it. This is just the outflow because the water's high. There's no current moving where I'm standing here. I believe the brook is in that direction about 50 yards. You can see that pine tree line in the distance indicating the beginning of high ground. Somewhere between in there, here and there, is Snipatuit Brook. Here's the view from the Snipatuit Road culvert, looking to the west or south. You can see that the channel's been cut by ancient agriculture, taking place no more, but clearly once upon a time, this whole area probably would have been clear right to the pond. Something was grown in here. This is the culvert under North Ave, flowing toward Quiticus and away from Snipatuit. And there's a level gauge there now. You can see by the things floating in the current which way the current's going. So I've been here twice. It's that way every single day. This is Snipatuit Brook, headed toward the Assawompsett Pond complex. You can see by the direction of the grass and by the things floating that there's a pretty good current in there. So that's all water flowing out of Snipatuit Pond through that flowage and out to Quiticus. Traditionally, Snipatuit Brook didn't flow in one direction. It flowed in both directions. And if you're wondering why it flows in one direction today, there's your answer right there. That is a dam. It was installed initially as a herring counting structure, but it's also being used to hold water in Snipatuit Pond. The flaw in that argument is that you can't hold water in Snipatuit Pond with that one structure, because when you raise the level of the pond at the south outlet, you simply force water to flow in that direction into Snipatuit Brook and out into the Quiticus complex.